Hello, and welcome to the Living Well Show, the program that strives to empower older adults to live life on their own terms. I am your host, Nicolette Hume, the Community Engagement Coordinator for the City of Lake Oswego Adult Community Center. Today, we will be talking about intimate betrayal. Infidelity in any relationship can be absolutely devastating, leaving the victim or victims completely at a loss for what to do and try to figure out how this happened in the first place. And also wondering about the true authenticity of the relationship that they had. I would like to introduce today licensed marriage and family therapist Kristen Snowden, who specializes in addiction recovery, intimacy disorders, attachment theory, and betrayal trauma. She currently runs a private practice and is an adjunct therapist and psychoeducator at Avalon Malibu, a treatment center for substance abuse and mental health disorders in California. She is the author of the new book, Life Anonymous: 12 Steps to Heal and Transform Your Life. She is also a webinar host with sexandrelationshiphealing.com and has a very large following on her YouTube channel, which features many incredible videos to overcoming life's greatest challenges. Welcome to the show, Kristen.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So before we begin getting into the nuts and bolts of intimate betrayal, can you kind of share with us your background to working in addiction recovering and intimacy issues?
Well, sure. Along my path, I've worked in treatment centers for youth who had substance abuse issues, and then I've also worked in psychiatric hospitals where many of the clients were detoxing or dealing with substance abuse issues. But really, I didn't dive wholehearted into the whole process and said, this is where I want to spend the rest of my career until I met Rob Weiss and his first treatment center of any kind, which was a men's dual diagnosis drug and sex addiction program. And that is where I learned where human connection can go painfully bad and upside down and become dark. In the quest to receive validation and love, it can get really dark and messy, and you mix in substance use, sexual acting out behaviors. And then I kind of merged it into my private practice, where obviously you don't see many outpatient people coming in with sex and drug addiction issues, but more what we call single infidelity, betrayal, trauma type issues. And I found that even though there's a huge spectrum of severity and damage and acting out behaviors, there's still some commonalities between the two. And I've been hooked ever since in working with that type of clientele.
I find it really interesting that the group you originally worked with are men, because men have kind of historically been, they haven't been given the freedom to really share, these certain traumas that have happened to them throughout their lifetime. And so I can see that being really profound work. And the other interesting thing too is you yourself are not, you don't identify as an addict, but you do work in that field. And so I find that to be really interesting. However, there are other things that, we're just humans in general, and we deal with different things. So at the end of the day, those are still things that people in addiction do deal with. In regards to relationships, what are the different types of infidelity that relationships can face? Because it's just not that, physical infidelity. It can be others. Can you go into more of that?
Absolutely. There's always a spectrum when it comes to mental health, when it comes to marital issues, even when it comes to acting out unhealthy maladaptive skills like substance use, right? There is a spectrum. And so one could simply say whenever I have made a commitment and promise to somebody, and there is an understanding that we trust each other and we put each other's interests in mind, that we're teammates, and then you do something to betray that trust, that is a betrayal. And that ignites some level of trauma. Now, that can be taken all the way to the extreme where I suddenly unveil that we are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt because of an overspending problem or a gambling issue, or there's drug behavior or substance use behavior where you continuously kind of decide to lean into your addiction and the behaviors tied into that instead of me as your partner. And then there's also the huge spectrum of infidelity, and that can be as somewhat benign as you're constantly flirting with people all around you. So from the barista who's brewing your coffee to your partner's friends, pushing boundaries at work, all the way over to, yes, where there's the physical infidelity, where, the sex organs meet each other. But definitely when I talk to all the varied people in my practices and at my treatment centers, it is never about the physical contact. Yes, that is traumatizing. Yes, that does impact their shame and their vulnerability and the issues around the infidelity. But it's usually about the lies that were told that mainly impact people during the span of the betrayal experience.
Well, and out of curiosity too, is there certain types of personalities or certain people that are just more prone to acting out in these ways?
Well, many people would say, and many of those who study affairs and infidelity or even addiction, let's say, they are a way of handling and sorting out feelings that are there that maybe I didn't have the language for or the understanding of what's going on. So for instance, sometimes infidelity is a symptom of a problem that's going on in your own life or maybe in the marital coupleship, but you just don't have the language for it. You don't have the communication skills or the ability to bring it up with your partner. And so you'll act it out. And so often it's the people who are using these maladaptive skills of substance abuse or having affairs or going outside their marriage, et cetera, are the people who really struggle with identifying, so they don't have the connection within themselves to say that I'm happy, I'm sad, this isn't working for me, I don't like this. This is the way that I need to get my needs met. I need to communicate it this way. I have a safe enough or vulnerable enough or intimate connection with my partner so we can have this uncomfortable conversation and work together to get to a better place. That's usually absent in their life. And so they just kind of go and say, all right, I'm just going to get my needs met behind everyone's back, despite the promises that I've made. And, I'll just deal with it. I don't want to deal with the consequences. I'm just not going to think about it.
Well, and with that, so let's say someone is using this as a void filler. I mean, that's what it sounds like. They're kind of filling that void within themselves, or not able, as you're saying, to communicate what their needs are, regardless of who their partner is. This person probably has an issue with this in all aspects of their life, correct? I mean, does that sound right, or am I over?
Right. Yeah, you're saying that the affair, because what I'm hearing you say is that the affair is just a symptom of a problem, right? It's right. I know there's variations of people's storylines, but I've been doing this long enough to say that, yeah, sure, maybe you've suddenly stumbled upon your soulmate, except then why lie and sneak around about it and not be upfront and kind of deal with it in an open, transparent way and deal with the consequences? That's not usually the case. It comes with acting, seeing something you want or seeing something that really triggers something intense in you, and you going towards that intensity instead of actually wanting to deal with the consequences or having those uncomfortable conversations or doing some really tough work. As my mentor Rob Weiss would say, you always have choices. You can always go to couples therapy. You can always get a divorce. You can always seek intensity in a less destructive, lying, manipulative way, drive fast cars, jump out of airplanes. It doesn't have to be that way.
The other thing that I've heard with that as well is, so we have someone, let's say, in the situation that you're talking about. And then I've also heard of people who, cheat on their spouse, but it may be an underlying mental health episode. Would you say that is true? Could someone act out in this way because maybe they're having a mental breakdown of some sort, or some other thing going on?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, there's several different answers to that. So there are people who struggle with bipolar or manic depression, as kind of the name that we understand more, which sometimes they'll go into a manic upswing, and that will cause them to not really consider the consequences of their actions, become hypersexual, and oftentimes that might lead to acting out in an affair. Another reason is that it'll be substance induced, right? You won't be of right mind because you'll be under the influence. Again, for those who've been betrayed, these are not excuses, right? Because there still is usually very blatant lying and sneaking around and manipulation going on. But I'm just giving you some reasons about why this might happen. Another thing that I thought of that was, or not thought of, but I've read before that's interesting is Esther Perel, who does study some of affairs. Is she says she often finds some kind of significant event happening in someone's life, like a death close to them. And I always wonder how this COVID pandemic is impacting people, because sometimes when these big life altering events shake up your path, you kind of find that you're moving along at a certain pace, your body not really realizing you're like that boiling in the pot and things aren't working for you, but you just didn't have time to think about it. And then something like this happens and it shakes you awake, and then you start looking outside your relationship, your primary relationship, outside your everyday life to get some kind of need met. And so that will often lead to an affair of some kind.
If a person was in that situation, what could they do? Because it almost sounds like they're not, I don't want to say they're not in their right mind, but they're not in a healthy state. So, I mean, if you saw that your loved one was, potentially in a vulnerable situation where it could lead to acting out in that way or another way, I mean, what in the heck could you do? What could that person do?
That's the $1 million question, is how do you take someone off the train track towards destruction when you see them speeding down again, whether that's in substance abuse, in mental health issues, or you find they're just completely unhappy. I think the really easy answer is what you definitely don't do is you don't ignore what you're seeing. You definitely do not avoid calling things out. I've noticed that you're so much sadder, or you seem to be so much angrier or quick to anger. You seem to be so hypercritical of me, of the family, of what's going on in your life. What is happening? The worst thing I think you can do is not try to dive into those uncomfortable conversations. The problem with that is often there's not an open, safe space for people to have productive conversations. We never take a class on how to have productive conversations with our loved ones. So often that'll kind of add fuel to the fire.
Yeah. No, and I think that is a really great advice that you're giving people, is just to continue to confront it. I mean, as someone once said, everything will simmer to the top. At some point it will. And unfortunately, sometimes it can be the destructive things that simmer to the top, but over time, things will reveal itself. And speaking of that, what are some of these signs that one may, experience in their life that tell them that their partner may be, cheating on them? Aside from just doing a Google search on that, what are
Right.
some of those signs?
Right. Well, ironic. I've done a YouTube video on that, which is, signs that your partner might be cheating, just because I do see a lot of overlap. There are obviously always anomalies and exceptions to the rules. But generally speaking, if you find yourself searching on the internet signs that my partner might be cheating, that's a sign. Because I love neuroscience. I love figuring out the way that our brain kind of impacts the way that we show up every day. Like right now, it's very unnatural that I'm talking into a camera screen instead of to other people where I'm able to see their body language and kind of read them. My brain doesn't like that. It's constantly picking up tiny little meta messages, unspoken language telling me what's safe and what's not safe. So the point of that is that a partner who's feeling like things aren't right anymore, again, like my partner is hypercritical all of a sudden, he or she is making fun of me or speaking, getting really quick to anger, or I feel like I'm hugging a statue all of a sudden when I try to show affection. The person is trying to find reasons to leave the home a lot, is on phone calls or is hiding their phone more often, finding reasons to stay up late, etc. Those are all often signs. Sometimes it comes with increase in substance use. There's so many signs. I'd say the biggest is that you're just picking up that something is off, that there's some interaction between your partner and another person that you just feel like doesn't sit well with you. They're protective more of their phone and finding more reasons to not be around you. And that often will come in forms of picking fights, picking out reasons why you're the worst person in the world, why they don't want to be around you anymore. One of the other number one signs is you feeling deeply confused. Like, what the heck is happening? I can't put my finger on this, but something changed dramatically within this dynamic of this family, and I don't really understand what's happening here.
So, do you ever see people, like, once they find out about it, it's almost like, okay, all of these, small things make sense, that maybe it was, I don't want to say in plain sight all along, but do you kind of think that maybe there is some element to that? I'm not putting blame on a victim or anything like that. I'm talking about just like when you do feel kind of like your world's starting to be kind of hijacked and then it just all makes sense. Do you see that with people that you work with? I hope I'm making sense.
Of course, it does, and I understand the very fine line between being blaming and shaming. Right? You never want a person to feel like, oh my God, you didn't pick up that as a sign of like obviously he or she was cheating on you, or you sat there and kind of took his or her hypercriticism for months and months on end. So it is never meant to be blaming or shaming. Because I try to help these people realize, similar to if your husband or wife suddenly got diagnosed with cancer, you've never had a manual or experience in how to deal with this particular marital issue, relationship issue. And so you tend to spend a lot of months in, like I said, that state of confusion. But yeah, there's usually, that's part of the healing path, is when disclosure occurs and the person starts being upfront, honest about, so when I was asking you, when I kept making up excuses to leave, or when I kept picking fights with you and then saying, I'm out of here, I don't want to be with you, and I said I was going to Steve's house, the truth is I was going to the woman's house. there's things like that that are jabbing and painful and hard to hear and discover. But at the same time, your brain, again, your brain needs safety and it wants to complete the storyline. And it actually is healing, believe it or not, to hear that story and go, that makes sense, because for months I was like, what just happened? And now my brain's been able to complete the story and fully, kind of full circle, understand that's what was going on.
Well, and I've heard some people throw out the word narcissism, with the person who has done this. What is your take on that? Because I know that's a word that's thrown out a lot these days. What are your thoughts?
That is actually one of the number one ways that people find my YouTube channel, which I think is so interesting. I have lots of feelings about what we call like access to personality disorders, such as narcissism, borderline. From my work in acute treatment centers with very sick people, almost every person that comes in the state of having an affair or abusing substances, they'll have narcissistic traits. We're all capable of it. That's certainly more of my default state if I don't do the work to be better connected with myself and my loved ones and other people around me. So really, narcissism is a defense system. And if I don't want to have to look in the mirror and say, wow, Kristen, you are lying, you are manipulating, you have made promises to be monogamous, to put your family first, to not lie and manipulate your partner, and you are doing it every day during this affair, some defenses are going to have to come up, because it's not that I'm necessarily ready to give up that affair. So I have the choice to be truthful and deal with the consequences, and yuck, don't want to do that because this is really fun and intense right now. So then the other option is to just become narcissistic and feel like, oh, other people do this, I'm entitled to do this. This is a long list of criticism and reasons why I'm entitled to step out on my partner. And this is why I deserve it. And you're right, my affair partner does tell me that I'm perfect and there's nothing wrong with me, and that my spouse is crazy for not liking me. And that's kind of why people feel like there's a tie to narcissism. Addicts, when they're in their addiction state, they are absolutely narcissistic, but then they get recovery and they're not narcissistic anymore, because that is recovery, taking away focus on themselves and expanding it to actually realize the magnitude of the destruction they've caused within themselves and the people around them. And that's that humbling experience that happens when you have to kind of wear that warm blanket of, I'm capable of lying and manipulating and hurting people deeply. And this is the destruction that I've caused.
Well, and I think that is one of the beautiful things about recovery programs, whether it's for alcohol to food addiction to whatever it is, that it makes people or holds them accountable. And I think you have this slogan on your website about living with integrity.
Yeah, I work with a company that says Seeking Integrity, which is run by one of my mentors, because that's what recovery is all about, is learning how to be congruent with yourself and other people, and living in your values every day, so that you don't want to numb the heck out, with that bottle of vodka, because you're in such shame because the voices in your head are telling you you're a crappy human being. So that's really what it's about.
And I love that. I absolutely love that you have that in connection with the work that you do. And one of my other anecdotes I'd like to say is you reference Esther Perel, and she has a really, as I'm sure you've heard her podcast, Where Do We Begin? If any of you want to hear a podcast about the intimate parts of an actual couple going through therapy of various kinds, check it out. But she talked about cheating and it kind of being more seen as men do it more than women. but that as women have gone into the workplace and things like that, that it's almost equal, would you say, in your line of work, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's really hard because I don't just work in infidelity, I work in sex addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do tend to see more male addicts, but you also just don't know if it's because of the cultural influence. So for instance, I don't know if men are getting cheated on or uncovering it, but they've just culturally been told to push down their feelings, or there's so much shame that their wife would step out on them that they just don't ask for help. They don't. In fact, I've seen people where that happens, right? Women sometimes will feel more comfortable with asking for help, with going to a group of friends, saying, "This has just happened, help me, support me." They want to dig more into their emotions and feelings around it. And oftentimes, men are still given that message of, "Oh, this is something that you should feel shame for. You've done something wrong." Um, and I personally struggle because we have sexandrelationshiphealing.com and Seeking Integrity, and it's so one gendered. It's so men are often the perpetrator. We try to give help and support to the men, but there's so few that it's hard to develop enough resources to help all of those few people that come up and raise their hand and ask for help. But they do exist. I've had many women in my offices who are having affairs. So it happens. And of course, many men who are married and having affairs, they're often having it with their neighbor down the street who's married. So it
Yeah.
happens.
Well, and talking about attachment, because you work a lot with attachment, I had heard that people with a certain type of attachment, let's say avoidant, tend to be
Mhm.
more potentially, go down this path than other types like anxious attachment, avoidant, and I feel like there's a
Right.
third one, and it's not coming to my mind. But could you talk a
Oh,
little
well,
bit
it's
more about that? Because
disorganized.
there, and here I am, disorganized in referencing it. Could you share a little bit about that and how it ties in with this work that you do?
Sure. Yeah, I love the topic of attachment wounds, attachment style. Essentially, just for those who might not understand, attachment science and interpersonal neurobiology is studying and respecting and honoring the fact that in those informative years, those first couple years of life, a child's brain is forming circuitry and organizing itself around. We're just highly adaptive creatures, and we adapt around our environment, but children are so dependent on caretakers to survive that a lot of our organizing and our environment is our relationships with the people in our life. So there's this idea that in the first several years, depending on how you experience connection with your caretakers, so that can be parents, that can be grandparents, siblings, coaches, the first couple of years of school, etc. Whether or not you received trauma or you received responses and validation to your needs when you asked for your needs to be met, that forms attachment styles. There's secure attachment, and then there's three types of insecure attachment, which are avoidant, anxious, and disorganized, fearful. There's lots of different names for them, but I'm keeping it simple. And so there is a theory that, so for instance, in sex addiction, and again, it's overgeneralizing, so I have to be really careful because there are anomalies, is that many sex addicts are avoidant attached. And sometimes they will find and marry or even have the affairs with anxious attached people. And so avoidant attached, because of their childhood, whatever it might be, I'm not going to get into that. They've learned, I need to have people in my life. We're neurobiologically wired for it. But early on, they learned, I cannot seek out humans to get my needs met. I have to get my needs met in my own kind of manipulative way. Um, and they kind of walk through life with this pseudo independence. So they'll be the type that will get married, will be in a monogamous relationship, but not actually have an intimate, vulnerable connection with that person where, they have a tough day at work and they feel their body overwhelmed. They won't be the type that will come in to let's generalize and say it's a man coming into a woman, a heterosexual relationship and say, oh, honey, my boss just dragged me through the mud today. It was a tough meeting. He kind of called me out on some stuff and it made me feel really embarrassed. No, that's not what happens. Instead, they'll say, ugh, I feel crappy and I need to figure out how to get my needs met. So either I'm going to go drink that bottle of Jack Daniels, or I'm going to go gamble, or I'm going to go get validation and assurance and intensity seeking from that woman who I noticed kind of raised her eyebrows at me, or that secretary at work who seems to really think that I'm great. And right now I'm feeling crappy because the boss called me out and I don't feel good about myself. So I'm going to go seek validation from that kind of safe, benign source. And even in sex addiction, we have people who will want to just do transactional sex, right? Where I just want the intensity of just seeking someone out, like a prostitute or going to a massage parlor of some kind, because I just want to like dip my toe in human connection. I don't really want to do it. And that's the avoidant attachment style.
Mm-hmm. And then the anxious, because you said they tend to pair up. So what would the anxious person look like?
Right. So one of my most popular videos is I kind of talk about what again, we generally label, just for sake of educating you, the love addict and the love avoidant, right? So the love avoidant would be the avoidant attached. The love addict would be anxious attached. And their upbringing is not, oh, I just need to go get my own needs met. It's actually the reverse. It's, I need to morph myself into whatever I think you need me to be to get my connection, to get my validation. So I might be then the housewife that just thinks, okay, if I keep the house clean enough, if I perform in the bedroom enough, if I raise kids and I do everything and I look perfect while I'm executing everything, then will you love me? Then will you give me the validation that I'm loved and help me feel safe and secure, etc. And so you can imagine how those two pair up, right? Where the avoidant kind of just gives crumbs, like little droplets of crumbs of like, yeah, I guess I like you fine. I don't know, keep running on that treadmill, and always kind of has one foot out the door because he needs to be avoidant and kind of keep you at arm's length so he doesn't get triggered by his childhood trauma. And then the avoidant picks up on that energy and just goes, I need to run on the treadmill faster. I need to morph myself more into what I think you need me to be, all the while building up more resentment and criticism because you're not giving me what I want. Like you're not giving me my input of like, you're validated, you're loved, you're wanted. And then my behaviors just become more fodder for the avoidant to say, oh, see this, see all this nagging, all this criticism, all this complaining and resentment. Now I get to go act out.
It's just so unfortunate because in some ways it sounds like both individuals are living out their old trauma together and triggering each other time and time again. And then hopefully at some point they come to see you and they're able to sort that out for themselves. And when you were talking earlier about the shame involved in, affairs, and that we don't have hard numbers, or percentages of how often this happens with men and women or relationships of various kinds, because it's underreported, as with a lot of traumas are underreported. But one of the things that, is unfortunate is people are dealing with these things in silence. And a lot of that has to do with shame. So could you talk to us a little bit more about that and help us to not feel so ashamed about that, because a lot of people tend to take that on as if they did something wrong, or that they worry the world will think that they did something wrong, even though they know
Right.
they didn't.
Right. I'm committed to this line of work because of the example you just gave. I want to provide a safe space and a voice for those confused and shame-filled and broken people who this destroys their life. It destroys, I don't know how else to say it. It is completely destructive to everything they know, to have the person that they trusted the most lie to them, manipulate them, sometimes abandon them. These cuts are deep and scarring, and because they are shame filled, right? So they do feel like it is a symptom or evidence that they're broken or they're wrong or they did something wrong. That ignites an instinct to kind of turn inward, to not share their story, to not seek out help. And that is the worst possible thing that you can do. The more that you do studies and work and research in attachment science, you appreciate the fact that we are neurobiologically wired to connect with other people. There's nothing wrong with loving people, with trusting them, with giving them the benefits of the doubt, with continuing to pursue, to keep that marriage together. There's nothing shameful about it. It is understandable. But you've got to seek out help from safe individuals who do not make you feel more ashamed, who don't reinforce that horrible storyline of, well, maybe if you nagged less, or maybe if you had sex with him more, or yeah, you did gain a little bit of weight after the babies. I mean, this is real stuff that happens that just adds so much more shame on top of it. I mean, I could go on forever with that. And then you feel so rage-filled and so hurt and so upset that you'll maybe act out because you're angry. You know, you'll throw things, you'll scream at the person who cheated on you, and then they respond with like, "Oh, see, crazy person right there." And it just reinforces and makes it worse that you're this unlovable, replaceable person. So I have betrayed partners groups. I always try to have some of those workshops available because I could be the best therapist in the world. But most of the healing experience is going to come when you can find a few trusted people who you can share your story with, and they can meet it with, I hear you, I understand you, I see you, and I love you in spite of how messy this is. And I've been through a version of it too. And so you can feel safe with me, you can feel non-judged with me, and let's walk through this crisis together. That's the magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a great power in group situations with that, and having that sense of community and not feeling alone and isolated in that pain. So my question is, can you really heal? So let's say you have that relationship, they've decided to go through this, or they want to stay together. Can they really heal? Or is there some situations that it's completely unsalvageable?
Right. That's the $1 million question as well. There's so many answers to it. So let me just say, you can never assess the viability of a relationship when there is still an affair going on. Or let's say a substance abuse issue. So you could say, oh, I want to leave my alcoholic husband, or my husband's having an affair and he's trying to figure out, does he want to stay with the affair partner or me? That is setting this whole family system up to be in what I call a state of purgatory forever. You will never be able to assess the viability of, could I have worked things out with my partner? Could we have come to better understandings? Could we have healed the wounds and the trauma and the destruction we've caused towards one another because of our years of behavior or resentment or whatever? None of that could be assessed as long as there is an affair partner or an addiction present. So that's one issue. Then it is the second part that I was talking about, where the story has to be better understood. So there has to be a period of time where, with a well-trained therapist who understands betrayal, trauma, infidelity, or addiction, etc., where the person who's been betrayed gets to kind of ask questions and say, okay, so when you showed up late to our son's birthday party, where were you? And he or she says, yeah, I was, meeting so-and-so at a hotel. Or, how many women have you had affairs with? How long did it last? This has to usually be done with the support of a betrayal trauma type therapist, because they can kind of bring containment to what you could imagine as being a very adversarial and conflict-based conversation, right? Because the person who cheated should be filled with lots of shame and I'm a horrible person and look at the damage I've caused, right? Because I've spent so many months or years not really wanting to pay attention to what my behaviors were really doing to my family or my partner. And so he or she's going to be struggling with shame and defensiveness, etc. And then the betrayed partner is going to have a really hard time regulating his or her emotions, going from like, I hate you, get out of my face, you're the devil, to like, I love you, how could you have hurt me, and why would you abandon me, and don't abandon me. And there's extreme swinging during that entire time. You really have to have a therapist who's trained to not be impacted by those really strong emotions and those really strong swings that will occur. But can relationships recover? Absolutely. Again, when you work in sex addiction and you see, I've seen marriages that are like 20 years of people secretly acting out with prostitutes or constant affairs. And then the betrayed partner uncovers it somehow, but they work a program, they work a recovery program, they are humbled, they're surrendered, they try to be different people. The betrayed partner does trauma work, they do a full disclosure, there's an accountability set up to start rebuilding trust again. And there's a path towards healing. As Rob Weiss mentions, you often don't see the willingness to go through that pain and difficult process unless there's years of memories and investment in the relationship, maybe kids, maybe some mutual value that you saw in the person outside of the affair or the addiction. And so those are kind of the things that impact the success rate, so to speak. And obviously the willingness. It takes two people who are extremely willing, extremely tenacious, and humbled to do some extremely uncomfortable work.
It sounds so hard. I mean, to be perfectly honest, with that information you shared, I just feel like, oh my gosh, that just would feel just so difficult. And I can only imagine for the victim in the situation to feel a sense of resentment. Like, I shouldn't be having to do this. Like, you are making me have to take on this unnecessary burden, or
Right.
worry that you could do this again. Especially when you were talking about sex addiction, and with any addiction, there is potential for relapse. And it's like, then what, But in regards to relationships, and being unsalvageable, is there certain situations that you would just say, I just don't see any hope there? Or are you a perpetual hope person?
Am I perpetual? No, I swing. I too swing between optimism and pure cynicism. So it constantly swings around. There's, again, when you've been doing it as long as I have, working with people in recovery or working with infidelity or couples trying to recover from infidelity. You pick up signs or rhythm or intuition of someone who's truly remorseful, truly, in the recovery world, we use the word humbled or surrendered, to kind of like, wow, my best thinking got me here. So I need to kind of accept influence from therapists and friends. And if you're a religious person, like a spiritual leader, I need to kind of endure this time period where my wife or my husband who's been cheated on like rages at me, and I have to kind of be respectful and understand that like I did this. I destroyed our trust. I destroyed our commitment to each other, but also respecting for the fact. I think you were saying, why even do this? Like, what's the point? And from my experience, I can tell you the reason why people do it is because, again, to go back to that reference of that frog boiling in the pot, we didn't even really, oftentimes, these people didn't even realize how unhappy they were in their marriage, how much they were lacking intimacy, right? And so, by the way, when we say intimacy, I don't just mean sexual or physical intimacy. There's emotional intimacy where I share my feelings with you. And physical intimacy can also be affectionate touch, hand rubs, holding hands, or I'm sorry, rubbing someone's back is what I meant to say. And then intellectual intimacy and spiritual intimacy. So oftentimes affairs or addiction issues are born from relationships that are kind of lacking that safe space where that, I gave you that example of the man who felt beat up at work for whatever his reasons are, and it's not blaming and shaming the wife. He didn't feel safe to come home and share his story or share his struggle or share something uncomfortable and be vulnerable with his wife. And so once people have kind of seen each other at their absolute worst, it kind of dashes out the facades of like that I need to put up this facade and pretend to be something I'm not, because you know what I'm capable of, you know me at my worst. And so it kind of removes the rose-colored glasses and fog and mirrors, and we can just be real, vulnerable, intimate people eventually. And that's really what I've learned that we tend to yearn for from the very beginning, but just so much gets in the way. Shame, fear of vulnerability, fears of intimacy, etc., our trauma. But really that's what we want, and that's what you can get after uncovering an infidelity or uncovering an unknown addiction of some kind or any kind of secret or betrayal and working through it as a couple.
Wow. It certainly puts seeing at our worst on a whole nother level, for sure. But I say kudos to people who are really wanting to try to work it out, that they feel that there is something salvageable there between them. And for those who have decided that, okay, I'm gonna, stick with it. I want to see this through, and their partner is making great strides, and maybe it's been a few years, maybe it's even been longer than that, and they are seeing, their partner has not relapsed in this way, or is seeming to be on a true path of healing. But they're still having those nagging feelings of anger, or maybe even issues with having true trust in that person, even though this person since this has shown, again, great strides. How does one, continue to move forward or not let that hinder the progress? How do they let go of that and build the trust?
Right. So my answer to that is a couple fold. So first, I always want to know, is it truly a safe space, right? Has the person who betrayed you allowed enough time and energy to have you ask the questions that you needed to ask, clarify, because there's a lot of gaslighting that happens during the course of addictions or affairs. And gaslighting is when someone kind of goes out of their way to make you feel like your reality is not your reality, right? So you could go up to your partner and be like, what are you doing on your phone all the time? Like, what is happening? And why are you always coming home late from work? Or why are you always finding excuses to leave? And that person who is probably really cheating will be like, God, why are you so naggy? If you wouldn't nag at me so much, then I wouldn't want to leave all the time. But that is gaslighting, because the reality was that you're feeling unsafe. You're feeling like your partner is turning away from you and acting in suspicious, strange ways. And really, when you're asking those questions, and I have to teach my clients how to ask them in productive ways, which there are productive ways to say, I'm feeling unsafe. Can you sit and answer a couple questions to help me better understand what's going on with you so I can feel safe? Because remember, trust can occur without intimacy and vulnerability, and vulnerability and intimacy and safety and all that stuff can't exist without predictability. So anytime you're outside the level of predictability, I'm going to need to ask questions, kind of better understand what's going on with you. And so yeah, it's just kind of a slow path towards you being plugged into your body to say, like, I'm not feeling safe right now, or I'm feeling like he or she's pulling away from me. And gosh, is that person having an affair? Or maybe they really didn't love me, or I'm second guessing this. And then I need to have the courage to be vulnerable and share that with my partner in a productive way and have an uncomfortable conversation about it. Part of it is you need to take care of yourself, right? So you might need to do some trauma therapy, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, somatic experiencing. These are kind of ways to help discharge or reorganize the trauma that has reorganized your brain and kind of is held inside your body, because trauma is trauma and it affects your body for the rest of your life. And set boundaries, etc. But then some of it has to be healed through the relational wounds of having those uncomfortable conversations and replacing lying and deceit and manipulation and kind of mocking somebody for being vulnerable and wanting to ask difficult questions and having uncomfortable conversations, and replace that with a new reality where we're family, we're humans, we have tough conversations, we do hard things. And that actually just builds more love and trust and vulnerability.
Well, and before the show began, you had wanted to share with us a message that you received from one of your participants who, it sounded like, is in the midst of this couple moving forward, but they're having some kind of hang-ups in between. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, I get email all the time from people who find me on YouTube, and most often they're trying to heal from their own betrayal trauma. And the summary of this email was, I just found out my wife had been having my wife of almost 10 years. I think there was 3 kids involved, so I'm assuming they're young kids. I just found out she was having an affair with a coworker. It's been 7 months, or no, it's been a year since D-Day. The affair was 7 months. I've tried everything, is kind of what the email was saying. We've been to couples therapy. I've been to individual therapy. I want to heal. I want to move forward. I'm just feeling like I'm never going to, like, help me, please. And I get those all the time and my heart breaks. But there's so many things that come up for me. Of all the things I've covered during this conversation, I hope you get that there's a path towards healing. You should be feeling like you may be taking 5 steps forward, but 2 steps back, but then 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. So if that's not happening, I want to ask more questions, right? I hear coworker, so then I wonder, is the wife still going to work with that coworker there? Of course you wouldn't heal or feel safe if your wife was still around the person she was having sex with and lying to you about. So I really want to know that. Is the environment safe? Is the threat still there? That's hard to heal or feel safe when there's like a bear in your house still roaming around. Then was there what we call like a disclosure, where is there an opportunity for the betrayed partner to ask questions, to talk about how hurt they were, to talk about how the person's infidelity impacted them. Another big thing that allows people to feel safe is through the work and kind of the humbling accountability, vulnerability kind of phase of the person who cheated. There's a change in the narrative that happens. So oftentimes someone who's having an affair, you're talking to them, their spouse is public enemy number one. They will tell you 500 reasons why they have the worst spouse in the world. They never loved them. They settled. They have the worst sex with them. Their partner doesn't even like them. They're pretty sure about that. And then what's interesting is when they start going through the healing process, depending on how it goes, the narrative will completely change. And that's that really important shift that you'll see. Well, there'll be more ownership of that this was just a symptom of our really poor communication. I was really resentful of her about this, but then again, she's been really resentful about me, towards me about X, Y, and Z. I could imagine why she would be upset about that. I can hold space because I've done my own work to hold space with her being really angry at me. And now I feel actually strong enough to start verbalizing where I feel angry or where I feel upset in the relationship, and et cetera. And it just kind of starts moving down that path. That's what I look for.
Well, and you really put that into perspective. And I like kind of the analogy about the bear in the house, because you certainly would feel like that if there was certain situation that's still deemed unsafe. And I can only imagine receiving the messages like you do. And that's one of the, unfortunate effects, with the line of work that you do, is they see you as one of the people out there who's an expert who knows about this, and they want your opinion. And another question I have too is for individuals who want to seek you out for your, counsel, are you able to help people across, the country on that, or is it just for people in California?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have live workshops where I have groups of people. And again, it's more kind of educational lecture and allowing the groups to connect on their own. And obviously I'm always there for Q&A, kind of giving these answers to all these types of questions that, why would he do this, or what tends to happen, or what's the attachment history, or blah, blah, blah. What are my chances? Does this look good or bad? So I do see people within my state. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, but I also provide workshops. I have some courses online. So you can check out my website. It's KristenSnowden.com. It's KRISTIN Snowden.com. I have those YouTube videos that are free and accessible to everybody. I'm building an online community to provide a safe space for people who find my YouTubes to be helpful, to also find a community of people who might be struggling in a similar way and can come and get that safety and connection and non-judgment as they're trying to make their way through their journey towards healing. And I'm also give regular webinars through sexandrelationshiphealing.com, which is also a really great resource that I'm really proud to be a part of. And I have actually my book too, Life Anonymous, which is not just a book, it's a workbook. So it has some of my favorite exercises. Really, so someone who's in a state of wanting to change, wanting to stir things up, wanting to challenge their framework, life's just not working for them right now. It kind of takes them step by step and provides them some exercises and tools and kind of the best of the research and the curriculum that I use in my practice when I'm at my treatment centers and working at my practice.
I think it sounds fabulous. I do. And that just recently came out this year too. Is that correct?
Yeah, it did just a few months ago. Yeah, you can get Life Anonymous on Amazon.
Well, and as we come to a close, is there any final parting words that you would like to share with our audience?
I'm just going to encourage everybody. We have had a tough year. And when we get tired and when we're in crisis and when we're hurt, we kind of want to just isolate, pull in, lick our wounds, and just not do life. But I am going to encourage you all to fight for human connection. We are getting closer. We are getting closer to being able to be near people. Vaccines are proving to be incredibly effective, thank goodness. But just keep fighting for human connection. There is so much healing that can come in intimate, safe, non-judgmental connection with other people, and we have a long way to go towards healing. And by the way, let me just say, since we're on the topic of betrayal,
Yes.
we don't need a betrayal that happened in a relationship to define the entire relationship. Sometimes it can be just an opportunity, a very painful opportunity, but nonetheless an opportunity for growth and change. And the two of you can transcend it and get to a more intimate and healthy relationship more than you ever thought is possible. So I see it all the time. It is definitely possible.
Well, I appreciate your words of wisdom, and I'm sure many of you do too. Thank you so much for being on our show today, Kristen. It's just been a real pleasure. And as many of you have learned today, healing from infidelity is certainly something that is possible with a lot of hard work and staying in the moment with your feelings. And like she said, fighting for that connection. That's it for today. I'm Nicolette Hume, and thank you for being a part of our community. And as always, be kind, stay safe, and always stay curious. Take care.